Welcome to the ATP Project. You're with your hosts, Steve and Matt. And today we're talking about only one hormone. This will take 5 seconds, won't it? It's called insulin.
Wow.
Isn't that amazing? It was, isolated in 1920 and first used by
1920, so 100 years ago.
Yeah, 100 years ago. That's why Brooklyn picked it. It was a centenary. And I went to her and I said, that's amazing you picked that. And she goes, I had no idea it was that. And I went, I thought it was quite clever you picked that. And Banting was the doctor.
So what are you saying, really, now?
Well, no.
That was kind of like a very backhanded compliment to Brooko. It's like you complimented her, thinking that she was extremely smart. She admitted she had no idea what you were talking about. So now you're just what? Insulting her?
I gave her another science question from the 20s. I do every day. It's a bit weird, probably not podcast.
Was that the last time you asked the question, was in the 20s?
And I said, who won the Nobel Prize in 21 for physics? And she said, well, it wasn't Albert Einstein. And of course it was Albert Einstein. I just thought she might know that.
Well, there's the old 50-50 9-year-old.
I just thought you might know Albert Einstein, and she does. She
didn't even know that it was the 100th-year anniversary of insulin, Steve.
Insulin, Banting, yeah, that was an amazing discovery. I mean, you got to remember back then, this was relativity
What was the guy's name?
Banting, Dr. Banting.
No, not insulin. No.
Oh, there was a doctor who in 1869 discovered the Langerhans cells, and guess what his name was? Dr.
Insulin.
Dr. Langerhans. Oh. That's it.
There is no pattern to this at all.
No, there's no. 1922, Brooklyn will know this. The guy who won physics that year for the Nobel Prize wasn't very interesting, or in fact, he was a big bore. Do you remember him? Neil Bohr. Anyway, he's a physicist from back then who discovered radioactivity.
Neil Bohr.
Yeah. he was 1922, so a famous chemist as well, so he's quite good.
He's obviously not. I mean, look at us. We're all, 4 people here. Yeah. None of us have heard of him.
Don't know Neil Bohr?
No.
Oh, okay.
What's he famous for, Steve?
He's famous for radioactivity. So, how old is this piece of paper? How do you know? You carbon date it. And he worked out that isotopes are radioactive.
Oh.
And so he worked out how to carbon date. Well, that was the initial theory, and since then, radioactive dating.
Why do you know this stuff too?
I'm a scientist. I was a physics and chemist before in the 80s. My first degree was chemistry and physics. So why do I know this? He was one of the...
You remember the stuff too, though. That's the weird thing. I mean, I went to school and stuff, and there was a whole heap of stuff said. And anything that I haven't regularly used since... I've lost.
Well, radioactivity is pretty amazing. I mean, we've got the clocks of today used radioactivity to keep the time.
Well, enough talking about Neil Bohr and clocks and whatever else you're talking about. Let's talk about this single hormone, 100-year-old hormone, and we're still learning new stuff about it.
Absolutely.
That's probably a lot older
because
than 100 years.
in pre-1920s, if you got a disease called type 1 diabetes where you don't produce enough insulin or much at all, you just simply died. And that was the end of that.
Lovely.
So this discovery of this stuff that came out of, they called it pancreas juice back in the old days.
That's how they do it, administer it. They'd squeeze the juice out of the pancreas. They squeezed the juice out of a dog pancreas and gave it to... They gave it to dogs initially, diabetic dogs, and they survived. So then they gave it to humans and they lived a bit longer and then died. But then they purified it and then it became a cure for type 1 diabetes. A type 1 diabetic would die in a couple of months as a child. So now they can live till their 70s and 80s, live a normal life. So it's a cure. That is pretty bloody amazing when you think about it. And then to think that 100 years later, we're still trying to understand all the little aspects of it. And it's kind of cool. That's what I love about science, and that it's never settled and you never stop looking, because as we discover new technologies or new techniques of measuring stuff or new places to look, and then we find new things, and then we go through these eras of like the genes and then the microbiome. I reckon someone needs to do a era on the interstitial fluid and the lymph. Yeah. That is one of the things that I don't think we know anywhere near enough about. So in today's podcast, I want to talk a little bit differently about insulin, because most people, when they assume we're going to do a podcast on insulin, they assume we're going to be talking about insulin resistance and insulin disorders, insulin-resistant disorders, Pcos and acne, which we will talk about today. But there's some really cool stuff that I love to find practical tips. I hate getting caught up in diseases and treating diseases and trying to do that, because that's where we fall into these traps, because we become too specific, and we also become
too focused on pharmacological processes and mechanisms of action of single hormones and drugs, and we start focusing on treatments all the time, but we forget about people, and we forget about the reality of healthy living and lifestyle. And there's some amazing insights that have been recently discovered around insulin, and in particular insulin's involvement with the microvasculature. And then we start looking at that, and it starts involving other hormones. So you were wrong, Steve.
Of course.
We aren't talking more than one hormone today.
Oh, yeah, we
I don't think, from now on, I don't think we'll ever be able to talk about insulin without talking about things like thyroid.
Thyroid, yes.
And I want to show the link to there. And then if you're talking about insulin and thyroid, then it's going to link with things like follicle stimulating hormone, which then links into mechanistic understanding of what is behind such things as Pcos and acne or whatever, so, and the androgens. And then we can get an understanding, and then we can get a good understanding of where the treatments fit in, like the chromiums and the cinnamons and those sort of things. We can see why we do it and if it's something that you could do.
Yeah.
And the best thing about it, what I think people are going to get out of this podcast today, is realising that what you've learnt so far is amazing, and you've implemented it. So all these nutritional supplements, micronutrients, macro diet strategies. Today we're going to talk about exercise as well, and different ways of manipulating blood flow to muscle to actually use muscle as the glucose reservoir that it is.
Absolutely.
I mean, what percent? Do you know what percentage is it? Something 80%?
Yeah, it's over 80%.
Over 80% of the glucose that's in our blood goes to our muscle.
Yes.
And so when we're looking at high blood sugar and how do we what's going on with this sugar that won't move, we're going to talk a lot about muscle, and then we're going to realise that what happens is the sugar goes into the blood.
Yes.
All right. So we eat the sugar, it goes into the blood. And then we get this insulin released, and insulin's job is to take the sugar out of the blood.
Correct.
It doesn't care where. But then I want us to delve more into that process. How does insulin take sugar out of the blood? Does it grab it and then just kind of compartment, or does it to open a little door? How does it get out of the blood? It's a blood vessel, and it's got walls on it. And then we got the interstitial fluid, and then we've got our cells. So the sugar gets from the blood inside our cells.
Yes.
Steve, do you want to tell us a little bit about the mechanism of how that happens? What are the carriers, and how does it do that?
Sure. I'll simplify it first, and I'll go into a little bit more detail. What insulin does is it knocks on the door, a door opens, sugar goes in. That's the real simple way of doing it. Yeah. So let's go and dive in a bit more detail now. It doesn't just knock on a door, it binds to a receptor. Which you have to be sensitive to that.
Where's the receptor?
The receptors are on all the cells.
Okay.
All cells, fat cells, muscle cells, liver cells.
Yep.
And it opens up, it activates these transporters called glucose transporters. And the most one we'll talk about today is probably glucose 4 transporter.
Yep.
There's 2, which is in the liver.
GLUT4.
GLUT4. We call it GLUT4.
Yep.
And what that does is then this vesicle migrates to the cell wall, opens up, and allows the glucose molecule to come in.
What is it?
The GLUT4 transporter.
Yeah, what is it?
It's an unfolding of proteins.
Yeah, right.
Like the endoplasmic reticulums.
Yeah,
and it
right.
opens up. Fascinating thing. Now this all sounds great in theory.
Yeah.
And if this was just all there was to it, then you'd be fine. But if you eat a lot of sugar, there's consequences to those lots of sugar. It doesn't work like we're saying because there's problems with that. And that's what we're going to talk about. This drives all those diseases you're talking about.
Yeah.
Because if we had an unlimited reserve of insulin and insulin worked perfectly all the time, you'd be you could eat whatever you wanted to. The sugar would go into the cells. You'd have an amazing amount of energy and you feel fantastic all the time.
Doesn't it sound fantastic?
It does. And initially when you have a high amount of sugar, people do feel fantastic because you get a lot of hormonal changes.
But then what, it just fills up and then backlogs?
Well, of course, what happens is the sugar cannot be metabolized. So what it does is the liver goes, there's too much sugar in the blood, and that's toxic.
Yeah.
You can't have more than, let's say, 6. And you'll see your blood tests go, anything more than 6, the liver goes, well, we've got to get rid of, we've got to detoxify this sugar.
Yep.
So it turns it into fat.
Yeah, right.
We can
stores it there as fat.
Yeah.
Instead of putting it there into the muscle where it can be burnt as a source of energy.
Yeah.
Maybe because the muscle's already full because you haven't burnt it, or in some instances.
Exactly.
Or it can't get it to the muscle because it's resistant to the insulin. It's
resistant. And the reason why it's resistant is because of the triglycerides, which are fats that are made by the liver.
All right. So what you're talking about is...
Yeah.
In our bloodstream, we've eaten some food, we're going to have sugar come out, we're going to have insulin coming out. But if you've got a heap of fat in your body, a big fat load, especially visceral fat, that liberates lots of fat. But it doesn't matter. If you've got a lot of fat everywhere, you're going to have a lot of fat bubbles in your bloodstream.
Triglycerides.
And I've seen it under a microscope too, where it looks gooey and almost yellow. It's like, it's gross, hey?
It is yellow.
And you can see what the blood does. It's like... It's kind of gross. Like we used to do the blood before lunch and then go tell people have these fatty meals and then measure it after. And you can see how different it is.
Called chylomicrons.
Yeah, and these little fatty bubbles going through the bloodstream, what do? They just clog up the insulin receptor. So then the insulin can't bind to it, so then the little vesicle can't get to the side.
And it's a protective mechanism because you can't be burning fats and sugars at the same time because you just metabolize yourself to death.
Yeah.
So once you've got a lot of fats in your blood for whatever cause, whether you eat fats or you make fats, because there's two ways, then your body will stop burning carbohydrates.
And it's in a constant state of flux, fat cells. I mean, they don't just sit there like insulation. It's not like just foam.
No. The subcutaneous fats are more resistant. They sit there mostly.
Yeah.
But visceral fat continually pumps around the body, and that's why it's the most dangerous.
Yeah, yeah.
'Cause if you're getting oxidized fats throughout your coronary arteries all day, 24/7, they're going to eventually damage the arteries there, and you will get heart disease, and that's why obesity is linked with heart disease.
And the other thing with the fat cells, they're not just releasing stored fat.
No.
They're also releasing these things called adipokines. So we've got all sorts of chemicals, so hormones, inflammation. I mean, they can make estrogen release it. They can make all sorts of hormones and all sorts of inflammatory compounds and then other toxic compounds as well. And all those sort of things together often contribute to this insulin resistance.
Absolutely.
So it's not just the triglyceride bubbles that come from the fat. So that's why one of the reasons why the fat to muscle ratio is important.
Absolutely it is.
One of the other things I wanted to look at today and discuss was the blood flow difference. Because the way I'm imagining this sugar getting out of your blood, I mean, it's got a kind of what permeates or perfuses. I think the word's perfusion, isn't it? A perfusion through the artery walls into the interstitial spaces, which is the lymphatics, the watery bits outside the cells before it can then get inside the cells.
Correct.
So there's a lot more mechanistic sort of stuff. So I want to imagine it like, and I shouldn't do this because I'm a terrible mechanic and I'm terrible at like that sort of engines and stuff. Like, did you see me then? That was me fixing an engine. It's the same way I eat my dinner. So look at that. I'm fixing an engine.
Yes.
And I ate a screw. But are there screws in engines? Probably not. See, these are the sort of things that I don't know. But forget about that because I'm going to confuse myself over a totally different topic right now.
Okay.
Blood. Muscle takes a lot more blood. So if we look at the fact that skeletal muscle takes 80% of the sugar out of the blood.
It does, yeah.
And it does that via blood flow. And what is really interesting is that fat, especially subcutaneous fat, and that pathetic blood flow, it's got bugger all blood. So, I mean, just as simple, if we just simplify things and go, your fat ratios to muscle, how much skeletal muscle do you have compared to how much fat you have, could determine your blood sugar. That's why we talk about obesity, but this is where sarcopenic obesity is the worst because we've got not enough muscle to act as a blood reservoir, and without being a blood reservoir, it can't take on that glucose. So I want to talk about surface area of capillaries, surface area of our arterial capillary blood flow system and our microvasculature. And the more surface area that we can get of blood vessels into muscles, the more opportunity we have to dispose of that glucose, and the more sensitive to insulin we will be.
Absolutely. And so one way to do that, of course, the most common way, I guess, is exercise.
Yeah.
And that's a great start. I mean, there's other nutrients we'll talk about.
So with exercise, I mean, we get the vasodilation through that process of exercise, but even too, just the consistency, the chronic exercise, and even other little things. It doesn't even have to be like necessarily like resistance or intensity as such, does it? I mean, because just the ongoing you build more microcapillaries.
Yeah, that's right.
You know, the more you exercise, the more blood vessels you form.
Yeah.
You make more microvasculature to the muscle and also inside the muscle. And then if we have training that enhances vasodilation, like the engorgement, the resistance training, then we can really flood those muscles with blood and we can get even further glucose disposal.
Yeah, that's right. And resistance exercise is the best of the exercises for insulin sensitivity, but it's not the only one. No. You'll be happy to know you don't need to run to get insulin sensitivity.
That was a bit mean, Steve.
Yes.
You're having a crack.
Well, you're not a fun, you don't like running, mate.
Run.
What were you going to tattoo on your arm?
Scissors.
Why?
Because you can't run with scissors.
That's right.
So I seriously am going to get the scissors tattooed on my arm, and then when someone says, "Oh, you got to run," I'm just going to point at them. So Mum told me you can't run.
That's right.
I'm going to get glasses on this side when someone wants to punch me. Oh, you can't hit a man with glasses.
I'll just leave them on my head here. But no, that's right. So there was a great meta-analysis that
I'm going to wear scissors. On my head.
Just necklace, you get scissors. It sort of said that this was a paper published, a review paper, a meta-analysis published, I can't read the date on this because of my, 2019, where they found that the high-intensity resistance exercise had a greater beneficial effect than low-moderate intensity attenuation of the hemoglobin A1C and insulin in type 2 diabetes. Now, hemoglobin A1C is just a measure of how much sugar you've had in your blood over the last 3 months. So it's just like a marker of diabetes that we commonly use. You want to be that as low as possible, around 5 or lower. So that was the better one, and the reason why that was because of that muscle engorgement and that greater, because when you stress your muscles out, like you've done a resistance exercise, you hit the gym, then your muscles are absolutely depleted. And you will become,
when you say depleted, what do you mean? Depleted of sugar?
Yeah, of
glycogen depleted. Which is the storage form of sugar. So if we empty out the storage form of sugar, then we become more insulin sensitive. Correct. Because our body wants to replenish that glycogen, which is why we'll often talk about the glycogen windows and that sort of stuff, or that ability to deplete muscle glycogen in a strategy to do insulin resistance.
It's amazing because the paper goes on to say that insulin sensitivity remains for 24 hours. And that's where the recommendations have come from to exercise daily.
Yeah, exactly.
Because you want to be sensitive so as you don't build up fats in your blood, because that causes heart disease. And if you eat too many carbohydrates, like a bowl of cereal after that, you will make a lot of fats, and those triglycerides are the bad type, the palmatic acid.
What if I'm eating a high-fat diet, Steve? If I'm eating a keto diet or a high-fat diet, low-carb diet, so we just said that your body can't burn the sugar because of the fat in the bloodstream. What if I take out the sugar and eat a lot of fat? Won't that make it worse?
It doesn't, because it's all to do with fasting triglycerides.
And
the amount of fat you eat is actually metabolized a lot easier.
And if the sugar's not there,
you
can burn the fat out of the bloodstream. So paradoxically, eating a low-carb, higher-fat diet results in lower blood triglycerides.
Absolutely.
I remember the American Heart Association diet.
Yes,
they went less than 10% fat from the diet. Triglycerides went up 30%.
30%. They had to stop
in a few months. They stopped the trial because triglycerides are going up too high, and they weren't eating any fat. And a lot of people. So we've talked so far about insulin resistance, meaning I can't get this sugar out of my blood into my cells. So, but the reality is, when we talked about this muscle fat ratios and sarcopenic obesity being the evil bugger,
it's an evil one.
Is insulin like growth factor is what we become resistant to as well.
Hormone.
So. Oh, see, you've lied. You were just really sending them up the garden path at the start, Steve. So, we're just talking about one hormone today.
Insulin-like growth factor. That's IGF-1, you might see it in.
So that's what happens there. Insulin binds with growth hormone, makes this thing called IGF-1, and that actually binds to your muscle. Tell us that process, Steve. I'm back to under the hood of a car.
It upregulates the satellite cells in the muscle, so as you get more muscle growth of size.
So it is the anabolic hormone. Insulin-like growth factor builds muscle.
Yes.
So the problem is when you get this insulin resistance, the initial parts of insulin resistance is not obesity. It's usually inability to build muscle.
Correct.
Now, this is another thing that's amazing that I come across the other day that's kind of really cool. So we would assume we've talked a lot about someone having not enough muscle and too much fat is a major cause of insulin resistance and lack of insulin sensitivity. The standard process in that case would be, you fat bastard, you better get rid of some fat. I'm going to put you onto a very low-calorie diet.
Oh, that's a good idea.
Or I'm going to put you onto a keto diet or something like that. But I want your goal is to lose weight, and you will never get rid of your polycystic ovarian syndrome or your type 2 diabetes unless you lose weight. That's what the people would say.
Yep.
Now, what is fascinating about this whole process when we're looking at the ability to dilate blood vessels into skeletal muscle, it also involves another hormone, liar, Steve.
Another hormone.
That affects every cell of your body, the thyroid hormone.
Right.
So I know within a very short period of time of being in a calorie deficit, someone's thyroid hormones will shut down. In particular, their T3 becomes reduced.
Right.
Reverse T3 can increase, but T3 is the one that drops. And it's T3 that regulates the vasodilation in the periphery.
Absolutely.
And if you can't get T3 activating your blood vessels, then you can't dilate the blood vessels into your extremity and into your muscles, and you end up with a slow thyroid. And a slower thyroid preserves or shuts down your metabolism, which makes you cold, which also constricts your blood vessels further.
Jeez.
It makes it, and even they found that with a cold, people exercising cold, people doing these ice baths and things like that.
Yeah.
The point is it constricts these blood vessels to preserve heat from your body. If your metabolism has already been slowed down to preserve, because you're in a low-calorie diet and it's been slowed down by your thyroid slowing itself down, then you will never correct that insulin resistance, and you'll never be able to correct your metabolism.
Okay.
Because the thyroid's going to determine your metabolic rate. Yes. Your thyroid's also going to be determining the ability to dilate your blood vessels in the periphery. And if you don't have adequate thyroid hormone, then you can't dilate those blood vessels. You can't dispose of the glucose. It makes the insulin resistance worse, and you get stuck into a vicious cycle. So when you do make your macro changes to your carbs and fats and that sort of stuff, focus on the exercise, focus on the glycogen depletion, and focus on those macronutrient ratios, and try to also focus on your calories being in a deficit, but not to the point that we're shutting down your metabolism.
Right.
So you need to eat enough in order to maintain insulin sensitivity. Like insulin resistance is actually a side effect of starvation as well, because it's part of a stress response to say you haven't had enough calories. We're going to create insulin resistance to hold the sugar into your bloodstream, to hold the sugar here to help fuel the stress.
Right. So you go on Facebook, Instagram, and you see people saying you've got to be in a calorie deficit to lose weight.
Yes.
And the problem with that, of course, is when you go in a calorie deficit, your thyroid levels drop.
Yeah.
And so that causes this catastrophic, I'm going to say, I'm melodramatic, catastrophic insulin resistance, metabolism shutting down, and you feel like crap too.
Yeah, but those people are still right, because what those people do next is they assess it. Yeah. So then they'll go, oh, geez, you've hit a bit of a plateau. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to cut your calories further.
Oh.
And then see what happens.
Yeah, okay.
And typically they'll cut the calories further and go, oh, shit, this isn't working. Okay, we've got to jack your calories back up. So often there's a certain amount of trial and error. They'll calculate based on what mathematical equations they happen to be using at the time, or machine or whatever, to calculate a starting point.
Yeah.
But then a good coach has the ability to manipulate that starting point based on someone's results.
Right, okay.
And not only that, what I would hope a good coach would be able to do is actually manipulate the timing of these, because when we're looking at these insulin resistance cases, is that depletion of the glycogen, and maintaining that glycogen depletion for the majority of the day is a good way to maintain insulin sensitivity through the day.
Right.
The other thing that I want to talk about more, though, is different ways of training to really get your head around the fact that the more vasodilation you get, the more insulin sensitivity you're going to get.
That's true.
So this whole focus, we've got to get that blood moving, and we've got to get our body building new blood vessels. We've got to get our body really thinking about that, because those hormones all work together to do it. Yeah. And I don't want people to be stuck in their head in this insulin resistance syndromes, whether it's Pcos, whether it's acne, obesity, whatever, metabolic syndrome, high cholesterol, high blood pressure, all these sort of things associated with it. These people assume that all they got to do is just calorie deficit, just stop eating and everything will be fine. It's not the case. If you stop eating, your thyroid's going to slow down. So what's so important on any campaign when we're looking at so we can take the cinnamons and the chromiums that improve insulin sensitivity. They work post-receptor levels and that sort of stuff to enhance the insulin receptor activation. All that stuff's cool. But we also want to make sure that we're getting peripheral vasodilation through our exercise, and we need to make sure our thyroid hormone's being supported.
Of course.
We need to and understand the symptoms of a slow thyroid. So if your thyroid's starting to slow down, it gets a lot of symptoms. We mentioned cold, poor cold hands and feet, poor circulation. Think about this. You've got no blood going anywhere right from the start. It's pretty obvious that a slower thyroid is going to contribute to an inability to dispose of glucose into your muscle when it shuts down the blood flow to your muscle.
Of course.
I mean, it causes numbness and tingling and lower
like
blood pressure, but then it can also cause high blood pressure. And the way it causes high blood pressure is interesting as well, because what it does is it holds sodium into the interstitial spaces.
Oh, you know that.
Yeah,
I was thinking it was something different.
Yeah, so what happened? Well, I might be wrong. What's yours?
No. It could be another way, but with the vasoconstriction, peripheral vasoconstriction.
Oh, yeah, that'll do it too.
But that'll do it too.
And then you get this fluid retention. So we get vasoconstriction from the slower hormones, and imagine that in the kidneys, where the kidneys picking up these signals going, hang on, I got no blood flow to the kidneys. This person's possibly dying.
Yes.
Let's increase their blood pressure.
Yep.
Hold sodium.
Of course.
Did you hear I combined salt and sodium then? Did you see that?
That's
it turned into sodium.
So
we hold sodium.
Saltium, there you go.
They fought wars over sodium. So, you know the word salad comes from salted vegetables?
No, I didn't know that.
There you go. It's funny,
salted vegetable salad.
Salad.
Okay. All right, interesting.
Anyway, so hold sodium into the interstitial spaces. So that's the space between the blood vessels and the muscle cells. So what that means is we hold salt there. We hold a lot of water there.
Yeah.
And what that means is the glucose kind of get dissolved it's water soluble.
Yes.
It's going to get dissolved in all the water outside of our cells.
Right.
And that contributes again to an inability to get the glucose in, because it just holds and swishes around into that watery bit. Hey, you know that when they measure the blood glucose, some of them that do the blood, but there's others that just have the monitor.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, so the blood ones are measuring blood glucose.
Yeah.
The monitor ones are measuring interstitial glucose.
Ah.
So they're measuring a glucose, and there's often a big difference. And there's some interesting data showing at different stages of insulin resistance as whether the elevated blood glucose or elevated glucose in the interstitium, and then relative deficiency of glucose inside the cells. So isn't that interesting?
That's interesting.
All those sort of things combine, things. Now, once the sugar gets inside our cells, how does it burn?
Oh, well, it burns in the mitochondria.
Yeah, so it's oxidation. Is it aerobic or anaerobic?
Well, it can be either.
Both, eh?
It can be either. Glucose can be burned aerobically or anaerobically.
Yep.
And anaerobic is when you're under intense.
So when it goes to like pyruvates and that sort of stuff.
Yeah, it goes through to lactic acid and lactate, and the pyruvates can be oxidative as well. The oxidative, you don't get the massive buildup of acids in your body, and that's why you can do it longer. You can't do intense exercise for too long.
So where's this oxygen coming from? Blood flow again.
Yep, blood flow.
So the same thing. If we've got shitty circulation, if we've got this inability to dilate these blood vessels, if we've got those, whether it's from a slower thyroid, whether it's from, we'll talk about the paradox in a sec, because it can actually come from insulin resistance and too much sugar. Absolutely. But it can come from inflammation, it can come from stress, it can come from bad diet, it can come from all that sort of stuff. It can definitely come from smoking, sitting. I think sitting's the new smoking.
Sitting's the new smoking.
So like just not moving and not having adequate blood flow through to all these things could just be a major thing.
Oh, yeah.
Now, when they did those recommendations telling people to walk for half an hour every day, exercise, that came from studies where they actually initially, the real way which should have been doing it was walking for 5 minutes for every hour, 6 hours of sitting.
Oh, that's right.
And it was easier for them to say, look, let's just tell everyone to go for a half hour walk before they sit down all day. Yeah. But it doesn't work that way. For every hour of sitting, you need to do about 5 minutes of walking. And that's just to keep that blood flow, because you can imagine all that day of not getting adequate blood flow and definitely not walking for pump.
Yeah, no, you just walk and people, you just waddle around. And that's
Well, you walk funny too, Steve.
I do walk funny.
Waddle around.
Old history of arthritis and I'm...
whinge.
Never... Oh, I don't have any pain anymore, no whinge, but I just walk funny from it. It's always been the way.
Heckling my walking.
I do walk funny, I admit it.
This is quite embarrassing.
Playmobil. Have you seen the Playmobil movie? I used to have them toys. They're good.
It's a bit like that, I'm afraid.
Anyway.
But I can still run.
So back to my waddling. So I try to waddle for 5 minutes every hour now, Steve.
Oh, that's good. Go to the printer or something and...
No, you go to a pond.
Go to a pond, waddle in the pond.
Wiggle my little butt.
Okay, well, whatever turns you on. Yes, very interesting. No, but every 5 minutes, I think is a great plan.
With you.
I didn't say anything.
Hey, so talking about the circulation.
Circulation.
What started me getting really fascinated about circulation for insulin sensitivity was we had a cream, but it was a cream that you could rub on as a circulatory stimulant and dilate blood vessels. And the guys that were using it used to talk about we had a lot of bodybuilders using glucose and insulins and things like that. They could enhance their glucose disposal by about 30% just by using a vasodilator. So that was really fascinating, but it was specific into that microvasculature, which is really hard to target orally because, as you can imagine, all these things we've talked about that control your vasoconstriction and vasodilation, these little buggers are going to get from your stomach through the liver to the bloodstream to actually go via that constricted bloodstream to the area that's not getting blood. So that's the challenge, is trying to put things into your bloodstream to deliver it to areas that are deficient in blood. The problem is the blood's not getting there, so it's bloody hard to get those nutrients there through that bloodstream. So what we've got to do is a lot of vasodilation. But if you've got signals, stress chemicals, for example, that are released when your body thinks you're bleeding to death, or when that sort of stuff, those sort of things tend to constrict blood vessels and override some of the supplements that might be coming in to support healthy, normal vasodilation. They can't override a healthy, normal survival response either. So that's one of the challenges. Some of the best things that are coming out on the market and that are being used for vasodilation are quite surprising, actually, because the whole concept of vasodilation was always around arginine or citrulline that goes and makes nitric oxide, and nitric oxide release. Well, nitric oxide's got a nitric bit in it, so that's why they give you nitrates, from the beetroots or whatever. So all these sort of things were there to support nitric oxide, but it's the actual ability to stimulate the release of nitric oxide, and whether that's the priority at the time, that is hard to manage. And we also can become resistant to nitric oxide, so our body then basically gets sick of seeing it. So a lot of the new stuff coming out, there's a lot of polyphenols. So the resveratrols, things like hibiscus and green teas, and a lot of these antioxidant polyphenols have got this ability to actually help and support natural vasodilation and also prevent vasoconstriction.
Well, you're right, because there's a paper on it, absolute paper on it.
I know. And kind of just as a tip, I saw it before we started.
Now these use polyphenols. They extracted this from
a cranberry one. I didn't see
cranberry. Basically, it reversed insulin resistance and hepatic steatosis independently of body weight. So it reduced. It completely got rid of it. It reversed it in this animal model. And what they did was they gave them these polyphenols, and it actually completely reversed the problem. And the way that it worked was amazing, because it increased Akkermansia in the gut.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So it improved the gut microbiome. See where I'm going with it?
I do see it. Yeah, kind of. Actually, Steve, I wasn't thinking about where you were going. I just thought of something.
Oh, okay. Go for it.
Oh, now you've made me feel like an asshole for thinking about that. Why? No, okay, you go. What were you going to say?
Well, I mean, the gut microbiome has something to do with insulin resistance.
Was that all you were going to say?
That's what I was going to say.
Pretty fucking obvious, Steve.
It is.
You just talked about the Akkermansia controlling all that.
But I can give you another one. Do you know all these supplements people take with lactobacillus acidophilus?
Yeah.
That's highly associated with type 2 diabetes.
Yeah.
There were 6 big studies on it.
Akkermansia.
I was talking about Akkermansia.
And you know what's cool about Akkermansia? Lots of cool shit about Akkermansia.
Lots of cool shit about Akkermansia.
Is it thrives in a keto diet?
Yes.
It thrives when we're burning fat and the more carbon that you get through the mucus, and it also thrives through exercise. That's how you build it the best.
Yeah.
And by making space for it, by stop feeding the lactobacillus style firmicutes instead.
Or having polyphenols, apparently.
Oh, that's a good idea.
But the beautiful thing about all of this...
I started it with this. You stole my segue into your own segue. People aren't that stupid, Steve. They can see straight through you. It seems
like a pane of glass. But the beautiful thing about this is that this crowds out the lactobacillus acidophilus. But the problem we have today is in Australia anyway, a lot of people are supplementing with lactobacillus acidophilus, which is
who should supplement with it?
Who?
The people that are deficient.
Yep.
And the people that want to grow.
Yes.
Because what the times of our life where we're supposed to have a lot of lactobacillus is when we're first born,
right,
when we go through these major growth phases, which is why it's full of it through the reproductive tract, and when babies go head first through the birth canal, that's what they should be filling up with first, because it supports that excessive growth.
Yeah, which is what you want.
Yeah, but then you get to a point where we don't want to continue supporting that efficient growth. A lot of these bugs are sneaky too, like especially those lactobacillus suckers, because their favourite food is sugar. And the way they stop people from competing for their favourite food, sugar, is by making them not capable of burning the sugar.
Yep.
Which is why when you've got a lot of them, and these same sort of metabolites you can collect through urine, so we know it goes all through the body. So they can slow down your ability to burn sugar because they want it.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it competes with it. So
it can increase your calorie yield by about 20%
it does, by 20%.
So we've got to talk about calorie deficit, calorie surplus for fat loss, and you've got a different microbiome that can increase your calorie yield from the same meal by about 20%.
I know, and that's incredible, because when people talk about low calorie, they don't consider the gut microbiome.
No. Luckily, it does respond to that. I mean, the gut microbiome, but have you noticed in a lot of the studies they talk about the rebound, and sometimes they talk about rebound weight gain, but often rebound.
Rebound, yeah.
But the rebound weight gain is my concern. What happens there is these people, they cut their carbs and all that sort of stuff, they lose their weight, but then when they put the carbs back, they gain it all back. Bugs are normally designed to go through feast and famine. So they're used to fruit season disappearing and the carbs disappearing while you eat meat through winter or something, because that was in the snowy place that you come from, Steve.
Yeah,
that was all that was available.
Victoria.
Yeah. See what I mean?
That's it.
Victoria, us Queenslanders, fruit all year round.
Yeah.
But yeah, so what you'll find is we need to, whenever you're cutting the carbs, don't cut out the polyphenols.
No.
So polyphenols are typically found in the peels and in the nut skin. You got all through your nut skin, Steve.
Nut
so polyphenols in nut skin, they're in the outside the herbs, so all the outside leaves and that sort of stuff, the outside skins and peels, and all around the roots and all that sort of stuff is where you'll find all the polyphenols. So make sure whenever you cut your carbs, you cut your breads and whatever, and your pastas and that sort of stuff, the obvious high energy things, but make sure herbs and spices stay in.
Yes.
You know, seriously, make salads out of just bulk herbs. And that paper that you got there is cranberry, like I said. There's another one somewhere on hibiscus.
The great thing about polyphenols is they can be, if you pick the right sort of foods, can be all throughout a diet.
Yeah. Hey, the other thing, Steve-O, I mentioned nitrates for the vasodilation, and this is something that's always spun me out. The nitrates, remember the beetroot paper, where they showed that it provides the nitrates for the nitric oxide vasodilation, and it does that via the bugs in your mucus in your oral cavity. So you can have a poor circulation to your toe, and somehow a bug in your mouth knows that. And releases the nitrates that was in your spit from the vegetables you've eaten. In this instance, it was beetroot. And then it can then release that into the bloodstream, so you're capable of releasing more nitric oxide for vasodilation. And they're bugs. That's not you. That's bugs. That's like some other little thing. Well, it's not even you, and it does that. I don't know. How does it do that?
It's an incredible study, because what it found was that they gave these people mouthwash to kill the bugs.
Antimicrobial mouthwash.
And the scary thing about that, when you think about it, is how many people have mouthwash out there?
Oh, yeah.
Whether it be alcohol or even chlorhexidine, which is a stronger one.
Yeah.
But, or even has, what is it, trichloroethylene?
Well, which comes first? That's where a lot of this stuff goes. Which comes first? Because we know that bad oral health is associated with cardiovascular disease.
Very much so.
And hardening of the arteries and poor peripheral circulation.
Yep.
So which one comes first? Is it the fact that they got the bad oral health and they're using the antimicrobial mouthwashes to keep their breath under control and stop the those gum infections and stuff? Are they using that and then they get the cardiovascular disease later, or do they got the poor circulation, which means they get poor microcapillary control of the delivery of the nutrients and oxygen and sterilising environment in the mouth. You know, it's like crazy, hey, to think that we...
Well, it's kind of both because, you know, if you want to have bad oral health, you have a lot of sugars. And we know that sugar rots your
acid.
teeth.
I mean, you get it just from eating too much fruits and stuff. You know?
Yeah, high acid.
The vegan diet can be very bad for the teeth.
Well, very much because of all the acid, and also the fruit sugars also break down to stronger acids like lactic acid and those sort of things, and destroys your teeth. You know, like there's microbes that do that. So, you know, you'll go to your dental hygienist. Dental hygienist will scrape off the plaque, which is a biofilm from the microbiome, and then give you antimicrobials for your mouth.
Yeah.
And so, you know, have your mouthwash and have this, I won't mention the brand name, but there's toothpaste that have antibiotics in them to kill the bugs.
Yeah.
And you're just doing that every day and you're killing all...
Then you'll never have the ability to regulate your microbiome in your mouth, to regulate the ability to deliver the nitrates into your bloodstream so that you can get a good peripheral circulation.
Yeah.
It's crazy, huh?
It's crazy, and that's why everyone who, you know, Rebecca, my wife, is a nurse, and she works a lot in cardiology, and every cardiology patient has to have a dental exam. They all
right.
It's part of the treatments, and that's because it's so intimately linked. And the inflammation, the chronic inflammation from the infections in the mouth, drive interleukin-6, which drives C-reactive protein, which is a massive risk factor for cardiovascular disease.
Yeah, and a lot of these inflammatory conditions, or any trigger of inflammation, whether it's an overgrowth of even the good type of bacteria in your guts, or like infections, other forms of stress, toxic exposure, immune activation, obesity. Like we're talking about, just straight out inflammation getting released out of fat cells. All of those sort of inflammatory things, they trigger a stress response. Your body can't afford to wait to see what the source of inflammation is, so it constricts your peripheral blood vessels. But just in case you've been bitten by something and you're bleeding to death, or you're about to, and your body's picked up on these stress signals, or if they come from pain, you get all this shutdown of your peripheral circulation, which contributes a lot to an inability to have adequate surface area of blood vessels within and supplying skeletal muscle to be able to push the glucose across via the insulin. So if we can get our head around the fact that muscle compared to fat has got so much more potential for blood vessels.
Yes.
Oh, actually, I found a cool paper. Where was this bloody thing? Hang on. Here it is here. Under resting conditions, only 25 to 35% of the capillaries and skeletal muscle are actively perfused.
Wow.
So when we're just sitting there, we got only a quarter of them. So the simple process of just moving more and activating those muscles that were not being used, the potential, what did it say here? The potential capillary blood volume reserve is high. That was a bit of an anticlimax. That's why I said high. I made the high sound longer and much more important. But it was basically talking about the importance of surface area of blood vessels accessing skeletal muscle that will determine your ability to dispose of glucose. So if you're sitting there wanting to get more muscle growth, if you want to get more growth, you've got to keep that blood flow into the muscle, and you've got to keep using it. Man, what was crazy too, it all starts to link in, because we talked about the thyroid shutting down. What about that wicked paper talking about polycystic ovarian syndrome, where they found it required the thyroid hormone for follicle stimulating hormone to be working.
Got that
follicle
paper
stimulating hormone would not work if there was deficient T3.
Correct.
And if your follicle stimulating hormones not work, you don't mature the follicle, so you're capable of ovulation. So we talk about insulin resistance, and we talk about polycystic ovarian being an insulin resistance syndrome because we can't get, because we've got these androgen issues.
Absolutely.
So with the insulin, it decreases the sex hormone binding globulin, and it backlogs your androgens. Typically, is what we've always talked about.
What happens?
But there's also an issue with sluggish thyroid. And if you don't have the thyroid activated, the T3 available, then follicle stimulating hormone, which is the hormone that pretty much regulates the first half of the period to prep the egg to be popped off. Yeah. And if the egg doesn't pop off, it forms a cyst.
Yes, that's right.
And then that's all dependent on this.
Absolutely, and that's what this paper's saying. And we'll provide the reference later, but I'll hold it up there and just to so you can see a big loop.
But how many Pcos people go to their doctor and told to lose weight?
Yeah.
They're told it's an obesity condition. You have to lose weight. Then the problem is if they go to a calorie deficit to focus on fat loss or weight loss, sorry, I shouldn't say fat. So if they go to a calorie deficit and train like demons, they will put themselves into a calorie deficit that will result in low levels of T3.
Yes.
And if they have low levels of T3, their follicle stimulating hormone can't work.
Yep.
So what about these people? They're looking at fertility. They've just got irregular menstrual cycles, all that sort of stuff. For people coming into comp, prepping for comp. Remember our mate Bill Campbell? He did those. He did a couple of wicked case studies, and he found people comp prep only took 3 weeks. I mean, a lot of people will comp prep for 3 months, but it only took 3 weeks for their thyroid to really slow down. And then it was a challenge to always keep that metabolism high with a slow metabolism. Yeah. So you can imagine how many people going into comp prep and then their periods shut down because they've gone into a calorie deficit, and bringing it back, how much of that is involved by the thyroid hormone?
Yeah.
Crazy, huh?
It's crazy. And also, of course, that leads on to ultimately higher androgens in these women. And
so what's that mechanism? Tell us about the androgens with Pcos.
All right, well, Pcos leads to lots of issues with insulin resistance and all that sort of stuff. And it leads to downregulation of the GLUT4 transporters. Remember we talked about them in the muscle? So you get a reduced glucose uptake, which means you get insulin resistance. And insulin drives down sex hormone binding globulin, which leads to an increase of androgens. And therefore your aromatase goes down and your estrogen goes down, and then your follicles stuff up and you go into that follicular dysplasia is what they talk about.
Because the process of the maturation of a follicle, so getting the egg, getting the egg ready. That it starts with androgens. Hey, so the androgens are in the ovaries, not just in blokes' nuts. We've got androgens in the ovaries.
That's right.
And those androgens through that aromatase convert to estrogen as part of that maturing of the follicle. And that's a very important part, because if that's blocked, then you can't mature the follicle. And then you build up the androgens. But that won't just happen in the ovaries. That might happen in hair follicles and also skin cells, which is why they have for polycystic ovarian syndrome, most ovaries are covered in cysts. So people need to realise that. You can't just get an ultrasound to see you've got lumpy ovaries and then go, I've got polycystic ovarian syndrome. So no, you've got polycystic ovaries.
It's not a syndrome.
Not a syndrome unless, and it's not even a problem unless you get the full blown effect from it, which is that inability to ovulate and that sort of stuff. But when it happens in the other cells, that causes the acne, that causes the hirsutism, and fat cells, it'll happen as well, which will cause that visceral adiposity, the fat in around the internal organs, which makes all this stuff so much worse.
They get fat sort of around the waist here. I've got a picture of someone that I was going to put a woman up, but
I can do it for you, Steve.
No. I thought I'd play it safe and use my cat just to so it wouldn't that shape.
What's that?
That's my cat. He's got the same. He's got the bigger belly.
How is that a cat?
What do you mean? How is that a cat?
It doesn't even make sense. That picture. Is it upside down or something?
That's right. My arm. He's sitting back. He's just eaten, so his stomach's bloated. That's all.
Cats don't do that.
It's a real photo of flat face. My cat. It's Beck's cat. So you're upsetting Beck now.
No. You tell Beck a cat is ugly as fuck. What is wrong with her cat? I don't think it's a cat. You didn't just find a possum and give it a haircut or something, did you?
He had just had a trim at the vet, so he was a bit tired after the trim and had just eaten.
Why is it wearing gloves, boots?
they didn't trim
that's a tail.
That's his tail. Everyone can see that's a cat. Oh, poor flat face. But that's
cats, do they have flat faces even?
That one does.
Isn't it been a hint that you didn't buy a cat? You bought a dog that was an asshole, and you assumed it was a cat.
He's a good-looking cat.
There's a French bulldog, Steve, that hates you because you keep calling it cat.
The neighbour's polite and says it's a unique-looking cat. Is that a polite way of saying it, at least?
How do you catch it? Unique up on it.
Poor old flat face. Beck's going to hear this.
Anyway, cats make great hats.
Well, he hasn't got enough fur anymore.
No, that's an ugly cat.
So this Pcos is really interesting. And
why did we talk about a cat? Where did the cat picture come from?
For the belly.
How did you segue that cat? Did you always plan? Hang on. Is the only reason why we talked about Pcos today so you could show a picture of your cat?
Because for the central obesity that you get. And so I thought if I put a person up there, someone's going to get offended. Well, that's happened before. And so I put my cat up there because he's got central obesity. And so I thought, because he hasn't got any testicles, as you can see. And so low testosterone.
Is that another symptom of polycystic ovarian syndrome?
Low sex hormones, absolutely. Well, women have higher testosterone, but men have lower testosterone. That's a male cat, can't you tell?
What are you talking about now? Why do women have more testosterone?
Yeah, they do with polycystic ovarian syndrome.
Oh, with polycystic ovarian syndrome?
Aromatase downregulates. I've got a cat over there. I've got a recent report published this month, and this is a really interesting scientific paper about a woman who actually caught obesity.
What?
She caught obesity.
We made a practical... We did that as an April Fool's podcast, Steve.
I know.
Was it through coprophagy?
It was kind of through coprophagy, actually.
Oh, that means eating other people's poo. She ate a fat person's poo and caught obesity.
She got it delivered at anally.
What?
The other person's poo. It was delivered anally to her.
Fecal transfer.
Fecal transplant. She had
I just imagine that little slot in the door that the postman comes to.
That's how they do it. I didn't make it up.
Give it to me. I'm too skinny.
This lady had severe C. diff, Clostridium diff, which is a terrible infection. You give them vancomycin to wipe it out, and then you replace their poo. Okay, she was a 32-year-old woman. She had this, so they replaced her poo, and they gave it from a healthy volunteer who happened to be obese. They gave her the bugs, and without a change in her diet, she stacked on 34 pounds in no time.
Wow.
Just from getting the fecal transplant. And they also monitor her exercise and that. She exercised more and ate more and actually stacked on 34 pounds.
That's wild.
It's amazing, isn't it? So that's how important the gut microbiome is to your weight, obviously.
Yeah.
So she started off as a BMI of 26, ended up a BMI of 34.
It's true.
After the fecal transport in a few months. So it's absolutely incredible, isn't it?
Wow. Yeah, and remember the papers that we did on that April Fool's podcast, whatever that was. I think it was Is Fat Contagious or something. Yeah. Might have been the title of it. But it was interesting because all the animal studies was where it all came. A lot of it came from is that the rats, they really struggled. They could put a microbiome into one rat and make it skinny, put a fat microbiome into another rat and make it fat. Yeah. But then they all evened out the middle because they kept sharing each other's poo.
Yes, that's true. They do. I mean, obviously humans don't unless they, get it delivered like this one. So she had a terrible infection, and so they gave her a fecal transplant from someone who was overweight, and they developed the overweightness. So they caught obesity. Isn't that amazing? Yeah. It's like a joke.
The fact that there's microbes associated with obesity, it's not unbelievable to think. Oh, and remember, the other funny paper that came out of that thingy was when they went and measured the microbes that were living on the different equipment in the gym, and the free weights, the resistance weights, had the more of the bacteroides associated with fat loss, and the treadmills were covered in the firmicutes associated with obesity. That was interesting. That was a cool podcast because that started off as a bit of a joke, but the science was so solid. It turned into a joke to realise that you could use science to pretty much prove anything you like.
Well, they might think I'm joking with this paper, but it's published, and I'll give it to Brooklyn to, whatever. I don't know what she does with it, but it'll be accessible to people. So very interesting. So I found that fascinating.
Oh, that is fascinating.
That's a fascinating one. So it just goes to the importance of the gut microbiome. And we saw that giving them a polyphenols can actually, change the gut microbiome to be less obese.
So high polyphenols, we can help to regulate the microbiome to keep it healthy. And especially important when you are on a campaign for fat loss to make sure you don't get the rebound weight gain.
Correct.
Those same polyphenols, which is what I love, because it's the same ones, also support peripheral vasodilation and support a healthy nitric oxide vasodilation to deliver these nutrients. And they're the same ones before we knew anything about the microbiomes and all this sort of stuff that were studied and shown to be the most effective herbs for fat loss.
I know.
You know what I mean? So it's kind of cool. And then amazing. The same ones again, we're learning and improving insulin sensitivity. Yep. And it's never through just one mechanism. No. As we can see here, like we look at things like the cinnamons, hibiscus, cranberries, resveratrols and that sort of stuff. they all have a similar effect on insulin sensitivity. But then now we're realizing that they're doing the blood flow, they're doing the microbiome, they're doing so many different aspects. And that's why it's so cool to not specialise and to go more generalist and realise that it's nature knows best.
And I ran into a lady who works here, I won't mention her name, but she's pregnant, and they thought she had diabetes, so they wrote her a script for a drug called metformin, which is an extract from goat rue, and that's for treating diabetes. And the way that works is it increases akkermansia in the gut.
Yeah.
And therefore, by increasing akkermansia, it stops the liver producing sugars.
Yeah.
So, that's how they didn't know that's how it worked till recently, but that's how the most common diabetic drug works, by changing the gut microbiome.
So it's cool. Like for us to get proper insulin, it's not just a matter of going low carb, high carb, fat, whatever. It's not just fiber. It's not just low GI. It's the combination of lifestyle. We've got to manage our stress. We've got to have good sleep. We've got to have really good circulation. We've got to make sure we do everything right for cardiovascular health, which is our slow and steady walking to maintain good cardiovascular function. They also need to do the resistance exercise. We need to train for pump and vasodilation. We need to support healthy vasodilation and blood flow. If we're sitting all the time, we need to move more. Every time we think about insulin, when we think about any of these things, we must consider the thyroid support.
Absolutely.
We must make sure the body's capable of having healthy thyroid hormones. And then it goes back to these nutrients like zinc and selenium that we're going, we know that they're associated with insulin sensitivity, but we also know that they're absolutely essential nutrients for thyroid hormone conversion and production. So all these things overlap. Then I don't know if I mentioned this paper already because we talked about it before, but even found a paper that having thyroid function that's normal but in the low end of the range increases your risk of type 2 diabetes by 13%.
13%. There's the paper there.
This is all starting to link in.
Yeah, that's an amazing
Without
paper.
a disease in any one of them, It's just like this holistic strategy, a new lifestyle approach, and you can actually make significant changes.
Yeah. And the amazing thing about that paper, I got it here too because you put me onto it, an amazing paper where it gave them, quote, normal thyroid function, even if it's just low normal. So your TSH might be 2.
Yeah, these people didn't even, they measured more than just TSH.
Yeah, they measured free T4 and free T3.
If you're just measuring TSH, you seriously have no idea what your thyroid function is.
No, you don't. And they had slightly lower normal levels, and the low to low normal thyroid function are risk factors for diabetes. That's what the paper concluded. So, I mean, you could just
zinc. We just mentioned zinc. I just interrupted you again, Steve.
No,
so
right.
Just shut the hell up. I've got to tell you about zinc.
Zinc, yeah.
No, the thing is with zinc, if you have a zinc deficient, TSH is zinc dependent.
Yeah.
If you have a zinc deficiency, you can't make TSH.
No.
So if your doctor's waiting for your TSH to go high to let you know that your thyroid's slow, you're waiting a while.
A long time.
Because if you've got no zinc, then you can't make thyroid hormones, you can't make TSH, and you can't convert your thyroid hormones you've got.
I know. Absolutely incredible. So we need zinc.
And if I was to if I was to be one of these insulin resistant stuff, if I was Pcos, if I was any of these, the first thing I would do is just focus on moving more, and I would focus on vasodilation. I'd focus on just getting anything I can do to move blood flow and just see what happens.
Yeah.
Can you imagine if it's just a simple matter of getting up for 5 minutes every hour and just instead of making those phone calls around the office, walk around. I know I annoy everyone when I do it, but I go crazy sitting down there all day. In my ivory tower, it's so lonely, Steve.
Yeah, I know. I mean,
all I can hear is the harps all day, and it's just it drives me crazy.
But if you wanted to, we've got these things called mobile phones.
Cucumber sandwiches, Matthew? Well, a tea is not complete without my cucumber sandwiches.
Absolutely. So I mean, you've got these mobile phones. Go mobile with them.
What?
You've got a mobile phone. We can go mobile with them. We can walk around. You've heard of type 1, type 2, and then you've got this now type 3 diabetes.
Don't start me, Steve. Type 3?
Type 3 diabetes. Can you believe it?
I can.
The name for it
got a piece of paper there. I'd be mad to deny that.
It's called Alzheimer's.
Oh, look at that fat bastard. Has he got type 3?
He's got type 3.
Looks like he's got type 1, 2 and 3.
He's quite a large one. It's like my cat almost.
Said the fuck controller.
Yes. Now, this causes the usual obesity and fatty livers and type 2 diabetes there. But if it flows on down these charts here, and I hope we can pick all this up, but it ends up increasing these things called NFTs, which are NFTs.
What is a NUFT?
NUFT is a neurofibrillary tangle. It's one of those plaques in your brain.
Oh, wow.
And so this is now a new cause
so type 3 is diabetic brain?
Yep. Diabetes, it's called brain diabetes, or it's called Alzheimer's,
I had it
or
backwards.
Dementia. And we know that diabetes is a massive...
Hang on, so dementia, Alzheimer's...
This is one of the major causes.
Wow.
And they're now calling it type 3 diabetes.
Wow.
Amazing,
really?
isn't it? Yep.
Huh.
So we're
Kind
talking
of
about
makes sense because they've got no fuel going into their cells in their head.
Absolutely, and of course the brain becomes insulin resistant, and you know, one of the mechanisms here, you know, is activation of the neuroinflammation through the insulin resistance, which is if you get too much insulin, you get inflammation, and that causes the activation of the microglia in the brain. So glial cells are immune cells in your brain, and you get plaques forming.
Well, I'll be buggered.
Yeah. So it's another plaque and another plaque formation there in the neurofibrillary tangles, of course. And then you get a loss of synapses due to the leptin impairment. And we haven't talked about leptin too much.
Yeah.
That's another adipokine.
I'll talk about another.
So this is the new sort of way we're going forward.
Wow.
Is that we're calling it type 3 diabetes in the literature.
Hey, you know what's interesting about that then? Because the other thing I was going to say with this with the other skeletal muscle stuff, the other important stuff is to continually focus on lymphatic drainage. Make sure you're not holding a lot of stuff in your lymph, because that creates a lot of problem with your insulin sensitivity. Lymphatic congestion, interstitial fluid retention and edema and that sort of stuff is a big problem, and contributes to insulin resistance. But the other part of the brain research talking about Alzheimer's and dementia has been talking about the glymphatic system and the importance of, so when we go to sleep at night, the water content in our brain increases by 60%. And that, because your skull is a certain size, it can't expand, so it squashes your brain, and it's like squeezes the sponge, and all the stuff comes out into the water, and the glymphatic system can then drain it all away. And the importance of sleep and the importance of having good quality sleep and moving around and all that sort of stuff in your sleep, swishing all this water through your brain is so important when it comes to preventing these disorders.
Absolutely.
So again, lymphatic, and for our body, the best way to move our lymph is through muscle contractions, because it doesn't have a pump; it's got to be squeezed out.
It does.
That's another
interesting.
way.
Interesting, and it's regulated by a hormone in the brain called calcitonin gene-related peptide. Which is a vasodilatory hormone in the brain.
Wow.
That's heavily associated with, if you have too much of it, migraines.
Wow.
That's the key cause of migraines.
And what's interesting about that is you need your cortisol to drop, so you're not holding water in your body, so that way you can get the flood of water to your brain.
That's right.
Wow.
So you need this, there's this great interplay here. And so, you know, calcitonin gene-related peptide.
You get a lymphatic massage on your head.
Oh, I don't know.
Sleep.
Be interesting to figure out, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
So this calcitonin gene-related peptide has been the enemy for a few years now, but now it's becoming a friend again.
Wow.
Because it's there for a reason, and it's a vasodilator.
Everything's there for a reason, hey?
Yeah, and then the treatment for it is they give the brain triptans, which increases serotonin, which is vasoconstricting in the brain. So that's the treatment is triptans, like elatriptan.
Yeah, wow.
Or sumatriptan. There's heaps of triptans. And they're all tryptin. They're all tryptin.
Yeah.
And they all increase serotonin, and they basically activate the 2B receptors of the blood. That's how I remember it. The 1B, receptors for serotonin. So it causes vasoconstriction. The brain stops your migraine.
Yeah, right.
So but this way you need the circulation. So another way around this, of course, to regulate calcitonin gene-related peptide is, you're going to sound like a broken record, but exercise.
I think
Magnesium
exercise
is
important.
good too.
I think today we've come out with magnesium, did you say?
Magnesium is very important as well.
All right, so we need zincs, we need magnesium, we need selenium. We need to get the cranberries, we need to get the hibiscuses, we need the cinnamons, the chromiums, all that sort of stuff is all cool.
Yep.
But you got to exercise. We got to sleep well at night. We got to get regular exercise to get the blood flow and moving to every little part of the body.
Absolutely.
We've got to control our calories to be in a calorie deficit to be able to lose weight, obviously. But what that means to you and me is very different.
Very different.
Everyone's individual.
Microbiome.
So you need to make sure you've got that calorie deficit to be able to change your body composition, but not calorie deficit to the point that's going to shut down your metabolism and thyroid.
Exactly. It's a balancing
this is
act.
so cool.
It's a balancing act.
And if you do nothing else but just work out ways of increasing the surface area of the capillaries within your skeletal muscle, then you're going to be doing something different that you probably haven't tried.
And you got to move. Like Michael Galley, he works here as a salesman. He's also a very good bodybuilder, obviously. And he would get up.
Mr. Southport at
he
one
was
stage.
Mr. Southport.
Remember that? And then 7 times Australia or something.
Something like that.
Mr. Southport was impressive.
But he would get up and say, I'd go for a vigorous walk in the morning.
What's that?
He'd get up and get a vigorous walk in the morning. And I always talk to him about that. And I go, why aren't you in the gym? He goes, you just got to get the blood flowing. And
same with Mary. We go through with Mary. Oh, Chris Thomas.
Oh, yeah.
This time of year, I always call him Mary. Merry Christmas. But he's taught me a lot, actually, that some of the tricks that he was doing with his athletes, by that full glycogen depletion, all about emptying, and then they talk about the backload at night. So that was that really loading back up at carbs before bed. That way they never had that rank calorie deficit that would put them into starvation mode, and they get the really good sleep and everything like that. But it was the long durations of glycogen depletion that helped to maintain insulin sensitivity.
It's
so cool, eh? Like, I love it. And this is what I love about it is we just gathering data.
And they
it's
overlap.
100 years, Steve, you said, since insulin has been given a name.
Post World War One. So 1920, it was started to be, they started to isolate, look at pancreas and go, ooh, look at this.
But then it got a name and you could yell at it and it would turn up. And then, but for 100 years later, we got no idea still. I mean, we've got lots of ideas, but it has never been worked out. I mean, they just did type 3.
This one hormone does all this stuff. It goes everywhere. It's vasodilatory. It reduces sugar. We just thought it just reduced
Roxanne.
sugar.
Roxanne, I said.
It's incredible. And so we thought initially 100 years ago, this one hormone just reduced sugar, and that was the end of that. And we cured type 1 diabetes with it. We got it out of dog pancreases to start with, and then it's made synthetically these days, and it saves people's lives. And now we now know it does all this stuff in the body that covers the desk with scientific papers. It's fascinating hormone.
This is probably not even all of it.
Not even all of it. No,
I reckon there'd be a heap more.
There is a heap more, and how it works.
And you even brought in a picture of a dog's pancreas. Or was that your cat?
That was my cat, Flatface. He's good looking. He's the second best looking cat we own.
How many? Well, you got 2 cats.
Yeah, 2 cats.
Makes sense.
Yeah,
all right.
Yes. So, I mean, I reckon we could do this podcast in a year's time, and we could, fill this desk up with completely new.
We'll do it again in 100. 200th anniversary, and we'll see what happens.
Banting would have
Imagine
been
what
dead
they'll have by then.
Banting was an orthopaedic surgeon got involved in all this insulin stuff, and now look at it 100 years later.
Mate, good on you, Banting. Is that what you
Banting.
said?
Dr. Banting.
That's it, yes.
Yep. Amazing guy.
Champ.
Well, I'd like to thank everybody for listening to this. Putting up with us
I'd like to
today.
Extend my appreciation for sitting through that.
I'd like to thank our editing guy for
who knows
going to cut out a lot of...
Who knows what will come out. I'm going to listen to this one to see what made the cut.
I can't listen to myself. I sound so bad.
No, I sound like a drunk 12-year-old.
Oh.
And the whole time I listen, I go, man, I should have said this, or it'd be cool if you said that, or man, you should have burned Steve there.
Well, you walk out of here and you go,
stop interrupting people.
Yes,
I don't listen anymore. It's bad for your self-esteem.
It's bad for your health. Well, thanks for listening, for you guys listening out there, and we'll be back
I highly recommend it.
Yeah,
for everyone else, brilliant. Don't listen to me. Yeah. I just don't listen to me because it's me listening to me. But you listen to me.
Yes, everybody listen to us. We don't listen to us, but everybody do.
Whoa.
Well, this has been fun, and we'll see you all again next week. Hopefully, if we're not in jail. See you guys.
Why would you be in jail?
All the stuff we've said.
No, we're cutting it out. They don't know.
God, phew, okay. We never said anything bad, so this is all perfect.
Now they don't believe you. You've ruined our credibility.
Can't even
Just say goodbye to the people.
Goodbye, everybody, and see you next week.
Final last word?
That's it. Don't put it final last word. Oh, boy.
That was fun.
It was very fun.
Well, they were my yellow notes.
I didn't even notice that you were drinking.
Wow, that was impressive.
Jesus.
Did you hear about a duck that went to the chemist? And he ordered a box of condoms. Oh, he asked, he asked for a condom. And the pharmacist says, "Oh, would you like me to put that on your bill?" And he said, "What do you think I am, a dickhead?" That's my duck joke.
I don't know. I only know one duck joke, and it's not appropriate for the podcast.
Say it. I've got to say it now.
The duck is talking to this other duck who's serving him at the shop. And the ducks are serving each other. He goes, "How much is that?" He goes, $10. He goes, "Well, you can shove your bill up your ass." Both got bill.
Oh, yeah.
It made Brooklyn laugh.
Got any groups? I love that song.
I didn't think you were going to say that.
So
I'm glad there was no cameras on. Oh, there were, wasn't there? There were. No, that's the worst word.
No, it's so. Oh, okay. I was not going to say that, but I guess that's what she's going to do.
I
just see my ears.
Oh, ears, yeah.
Put them in your ears.
I still use those white headsets. Those little white things in the cables. Oh, God.
Gulliver's Travels.
Yep. Goodness, that's the giant one. Remember Land of the Giants, that show?
Steve, not allowed to talk about porn on this.
No, that's right. Oh, I forgot about that. Oh, God. Get rid of that paper.
Get rid of that paper. It's bad news, that one.
Bad news. It's
dirty paper.
Oh, geez.
Right. Oh, look at her. She blushed.
She blushed.
Was that a blush face? Thinking of me, Steve.
She did do that.
She did.
I was expecting a pissed. I was expecting a pissed off look, and all of a sudden she goes, "Oh,
I'm blushing.
Brooklyn.
Mention me." All right. Well, let's just finish it because we've got. Oh, yeah.